a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind.
It was basically a cube with inside of a sphere where the points of the cube were touching the outside of the sphere.
Roger. There's troubleshooting as soon as I
So this isn't anything that just is limited to the United States. It's a worldwide phenomenon.
Hi everyone and welcome back to That UFO podcast. My name is Andy and we roll on into January with a former UK intelligence officer, paratrooper, with more than 20 years producing strategic and operational advice to Fortune 500 companies, aerospace and government clients. Frank also shares his interest in post-quantum military tech, UFOs, UAPs, geopolitics and international relations, and I quite enjoy watching his Twitter battles and debates on the social media channels as well. So Franc Milburn, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, brother. I appreciate it, and I wanted to say congratulations for coming so far with your podcast, and I also wanted to say a special thanks to Dan for following the constitutional developments with all the different ins and outs and all the twists in the various bills in Congress and the Senate and the House of Representatives, because it's not the easiest thing to follow. And Dan's really converted himself into an expert on that. And I've been tuning into your channel to basically get the latest updates, because it's not the easiest thing to follow. So thank you both very much for that.
No, it's great. And listen, I look at it as if I don't know a lot of that stuff, and I asked Dan to go and check it out, and he does that anyway, but in helping myself out, it helps other people out, so that's good, because I think we've all got the same kind of questions, and you can tune in sometimes to various podcasts, and especially to the ones on the kind of in the US side of things, because they understand that more, and they get how their politics works a lot better, so you have a lot of people who don't necessarily understand the workings of it, and all the little nuances, so it's been great having Dan kind of break that stuff down, and I'm glad you've got the use out of it as well, Frank. So yeah, very much appreciated. Thank you.
Dan's done a great job. The other thing that I wanted to say for your listeners, how I really became kind of acquainted with you guys. It was in April of this year. You, Andy, and Jay at Project Unity, you did what I consider to be kind of two groundbreaking interviews with Lue Elizondo, which really kind of developed our understanding of UAP technology and where he was going with it. And I took those back to the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies, where I'd written my first paper. And those two groundbreaking interviews were kind of, I'd say, 70% the meat of my second paper that I wrote on UAP. So I want to thank you guys for that. I mean, you and Jay did a fantastic job on those interviews, and it really opened up kind of Elizondo in a way that we hadn't seen before. So thank you for that.
No, thanks. I appreciate that, and I like to think there's a lot of channels out there that are developing their own styles and tones, and you can certainly jump about a few shows now and hear very different takes and questions, and yeah, so I really appreciate that as well, so thank you very much, Frank. But listen, today's show is all about you, and we tried to arrange this now about 7 weeks ago initially, and I got COVID and all that stuff that came along with it, and here we are now. Well, little peek behind the curtain, we're recording this on New Year's Eve, so as we speak, people are out and getting ready to party and whatnot, but we're having what's going to be a very interesting discussion here, but it's going to be released into the new year. So happy New Year 2022 when everyone else hears this. Frank, you've led a very interesting life so far, and I'm sure there's a lot more interesting life to be lived, but take us a little bit through your background. A former UK intelligence officer, paratrooper, you've done quite a lot already.
I followed basically the example of my family into the military. My father was in the Royal Scots Greys, and later in the Parachute Regiment, and then later in the Special Air Service. And my family regiment is the Royal Scots Greys, although I didn't go into the Greys. But my grandfather served with the Greys in World War II. My stepfather also, he was in the Argyll and Southern Highlanders, and then in the Parachute Regiment, and then the Special Air Service. My godfather was in the Coldstream Guards and later in the Parachute Regiment. My other godfather actually commanded SAS. As I said, and my other grandfather as well on my mother's side, he served in both world wars. So that was kind of really my impetus for joining the UK military. We've got actually a very long line of military service stretching back like literally hundreds of years, sort of father to son. So I really, I always wanted to be a soldier, and I joined at 17. And I joined the Army Reserve as a paratrooper. And from there, I did okay in school. I got offered a place at the London School of Economics, which was paid for by the military. So I joined university as an Army scholar. I did international relations, and I was offered a place at Sandhurst on the back of that. And then from Sandhurst, I was recruited into military intelligence, and the rest is kind of like history, really. But it was very, very fascinating, and it was both a joy and a reward to serve my country.
Yeah, no, and thank you for that service as well. We've spoken to a lot of US military and such on the podcast, and I think you're the first UK serviceman. So again, thank you very much. And a few of the listeners echoed that sentiment as well. And all of that background and that history and that rich family history, at what point do you come to have an interest in UFOs? Was it from a young age, or is it something that came later?
No, it's from a very young age. My family, my mum and my dad were, sort of very open-minded. I was brought up with kind of like, sort of histories of Atlantis and, Charles Berlitz, Mysteries of Atlantis, Eric von Daniken, right? And I've got some UFO books here, actually, that I inherited from my dad, which are from the 1960s, Sanderson, Uninvited Visitors. Let's just say when I was in the military, I got an increased appreciation for UAP. But it's one of those things, you kind of like leave it alone when you leave. And I just kind of like put it on the back burner. We've all got busy lives. We've got things to do. We all want to like follow careers. I kept in touch with UAP, sort of reading books over the years. But it wasn't really until about 2016, I got onto the Richard Dolan members site. And I kind of got involved with that. And I was writing things on the site. And then I was kind of like, well, I should start writing about things myself because I'm accumulating all the information and it's fascinating me and it's kind of really drawn me in. My background is as a sort of post-military. I work with oil and gas companies in the Middle East. So I was advising clients kind of like board level downwards to, like locals on the ground on, security issues, political risk, regulatory risk, how to operate on the ground and kind of like, sort of medium to high risk environments from North Africa to the Middle East. And I've kind of like transferred that across to UAP. I wrote a few papers on the Middle East for various think tanks, Israeli think tanks. And then my interest became captivated by UAP. So I went from being kind of like a Middle East analyst to being a sort of a UAP strategic studies, national security analyst, I guess you'd call it. I wouldn't call myself a ufologist per se. I think there's a lot of great research in ufology, a lot of fantastic research. There's also a lot of baggage in ufology as well. And the way I approached it initially was really kind of like nuts and bolts, and as from a national security perspective. But since kind of like 2016, my mind has like really been blown and kind of opened up. And I mean, I spend a lot of time talking with people like Colonel John Alexander. People who've been at places like Skinwalker, and I talk to a lot of people who work on sensitive government projects as well, and it's just really opened up my mind to the whole kind of consciousness aspect as well of it. So I've gone very, very far from 2016, where I was just looking at like nuts and bolts UFOs, to looking at the whole range of phenomena, the whole kind of weird, spooky, high strangeness of it.
There's a lot to unpack there, but the first thing that comes to my mind is you talk about that time you had in the military. What was the general conversation? Did you have chats with your kind of fellow servicemen and women ever about UFOs? Did it ever come up just in the kind of banter back and forward? And what was that conversation, if there was?
It did, but it's nothing that I can talk about, and I don't say that being I am reticent to say that, but I can't talk about any conversations that I've had or any information that I came across as a result of my service, because the Official Secrets Act is all encompassing. I spent a lot of time with the Royal Air Force. I spent time flying on AWACS. I spent a lot of time on RAF bases, in the officers' mess, chatting with pilots and also debriefing pilots. So let's just say that piqued my interest. I can't really go into more depth than that.
Sure. So it sounds like there was an interest there, not just on your part, but probably from other people as well, which is always good, especially from a UK point of view. And I'd love to talk to you now about that UK point of view. Why is it taking the UK at the, as it seems, on the front of things to get so involved in this subject? Because we still seem like we are years and years behind other countries and continents.
I think there's a couple of reasons. One is that the UK is a highly secretive state. I was part of that kind of secret state. I'll give you an example. When I was a young officer in Northern Ireland, a young intelligence officer, there were things that we were doing that the politicians had no idea what we were doing. They just give you a mandate to operate, and you operate, and it's all based on need to know. It's very, very compartmentalized. So that's one reason. I think the second reason is that the UK is very much following the American leadership on this. And we saw that as well in the whole Rendlesham Forest incident, where basically the UK kind of abrogated sovereignty effectively and allowed the head of the American Air Force to come over to the UK and to basically take over the investigation. So I think the UK plays very much second fiddle to the Americans on that, and I think it's a very, very sensitive issue. I was going to say my experiences in the UK military, okay, and I'll say this tongue in cheek. Compared to what I saw and compared to what you see in Project Condign, the report Unidentified Aerial Phenomena in the UK Air Defence Region, are very, very different. And that's all I can say.
Sure. And from a UK point of view, you said that we are following the US's lead. The US, as it seems, is talking about this in the mainstream. You're hearing about it on, when the White House does their daily press briefings. There was a time, especially back in April, May, June this year, or last year, if you're listening to this in 2022, there was a lot of questions and press briefings. We don't seem to have that in the UK. We had one small raising of the question. Baroness Goldie, I believe, was involved in that, where it was pretty much laughed off and poo-pooed back in the summer. When it was brought up that the US are taking this subject seriously, do the UK government have any plans to follow that? And it was laughed off. Do you think? Again, I know you're coming from a place of knowledge with some of this as well, so I appreciate those answers can be a bit difficult. But is there much more of an interest in the background in this subject? Or are we happy to let the US take the lead in the sense that just do what you want, the UK doesn't want anything to do with it?
Look, I'd say there's very much a UK interest in the subject. You only have to look at Project Condign. And now, although it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, it says, it was of no intelligence interest, okay? But then you look and it says the UK would consider UAP a threat if they were able to penetrate the UK air defence region. So you have to kind of read between the lines. If UAP were able to penetrate the UK air defence region, if they were able to defeat radars, if they were able to, evade fighters and ground-based, interception, then we would consider that a threat. So I think you have to read between the lines on that one. And I think there's very much an interest. Now, I'm not saying that there was some kind of big cover-up with Project Condign. What I'm saying is I don't think that the guy who wrote it, and he's very capable, and you guys did a great article on it as well. The guy was a pilot, I believe, aircrew, and he also had a scientific background in radar technologies. I just don't think he had access to all the information available when he was making his report. And also it was based at secret level. If you look at the report, it's secret level. So if there were a UK effort looking at UAP, it would be top secret and above.
Do you think, because for decades and decades, the lore of UFOs and ufology, there's that dirty word that you used before as well that's got so many connotations. From a United States point of view, we hear about all these secret cabals and, rooms within governments, rooms within rooms within rooms, hidden underground, bases in mountains, Area 51, Groom Lake, S4. Yet, from a UK point of view, there seems to be nothing. But if you read between those lines that we do have an interest, are the UK so much better at keeping all that quiet? Because that seems to be a hell of a lot that's come out over the years from the United States.
I think the UK maybe is better at keeping things quiet. I mean, for example, Elizondo and others who've had top secret TSCI clearances can talk about things within certain parameters, whereas I can't. And I'm not saying that I have the same kind of knowledge as Elizondo. Maybe interesting knowledge, but I don't have maybe the breadth of knowledge that he does in terms of like a panoramic view of what was going on in terms of UAP. But I think the UK has to be very, very careful about what it emits, what it disseminates to the public, and what it doesn't. And I think for years and years, it's been such a kind of taboo subject. I've talked to Nick Pope about this, and he's got like one view. He was at the the Ministry of Defence, obviously collating these kind of reports. I was kind of like on the ground talking to people. But there's no doubt in my mind that there's a lot more going on in the UK as regards UAP than came out in Project Condign, and that the UK government is prepared to talk about now. There's a lot more.
The Condign report, one of the suggestions was that UAP UFOs could be a plasma. I would ask you what your thoughts are on this, because for me, even the reference that, it could be some sort of plasma phenomenon doesn't mean that it's not something potentially non-human.
Yeah, but it also says the Condign report that that UAP exists is indisputable, and that these objects can outmaneuver the fighter interceptors and ground-based missiles, right? And that can maneuver in extraordinary ways. So I'm not convinced that it's just a plasma that is responsible for that. They talk extensively in Condign. I mean, it's a 400-page report. They talk extensively about plasmas in the context of radar decoys and kind of like exotic military technologies. I think plasmas could be one kind of conclusion that you could draw about UAP. But I think there's a lot of other possibilities as well. And I think since the Condign report, what we've seen, for example, with the West Coast sightings, the East Coast sightings in the US, and the SoCal, the Southern California sightings like Nimitz, I think there's a lot more to UAP than plasma.
Every time we talk about this subject, and I mean just people with an interest in UFOs generally, we talk about the potential for it being a more terrestrial explanation, i.e. US, Russian or Chinese technology. Does the UK enjoy being left out of that conversation in terms of those are the three big superpowers, they have all this secret tech? Now, as much as you can, where does the UK sit in terms of advanced drone technology, advanced military technology? Because we tend not to be involved in those conversations, but I'm sure there's something there.
The UK is one of the preeminent military powers in the world. You only have to look at the fact that when you look, for example, I was looking at a Drive article, and it was on the US Navy's railgun, right? And it had like BAE systems, right, written down the side of the railgun. The British aerospace and British defence and contractors in general, because there's a whole swath of defence contractors from actually producing like the big ticket items down to like the nuts and bolts, literally nuts and bolts. The British are dug in deeper than an Alabama tick, I believe, when it comes to the UAP issue, and there's a lot more there.
Let me ask you then, and I suppose this comes from just it came on to the top of my head there. If we are talking that the UK, the US, China and Russia, those three big superpowers are potentially harbouring some pretty amazing technologies of their own. They're spying on each other. There's drones buzzing each other's navy ships and whatnot. What would be the next country? Would it be the UK that would sit next in that list of countries with that sort of technology, or would it be something else?
Well, no, I think the UK is like well up there with the Americans because there's almost kind of like a seamless kind of transfer of technology between the US and the UK, and there always has been. I would say that probably the UK would be ahead of Russia in terms of technology because traditionally the UK is an open society, so that kind of breeds more innovation, and that's why Britain's a small country, but we've got like the fifth or sixth biggest kind of arms exports in the world, right? We've always punched above our weight, the Brits. Brits are highly innovative, and we've always been leaders in military technology. You only have to look at our performance in World War II, and the fact that together with the Americans, together with the Australians, the Canadians, the Aussies and New Zealanders, we're part of the most advanced intelligence network in the world. The Five Eyes. So I would put the UK definitely on a par technology-wise, with both Russia, China, and as I said, with the Americans, it's seamless technology transfer in some cases. The F-22 is the only thing that the Americans haven't transferred to their allies. But if you look like the F-35, they've given it to the Brits are involved in F-35, the Norwegians are involved, the Italians are involved. Okay, the Turks are booted out because they wanted to buy S-400 from the Russians. But there's a very, very close technology transfer agreement between specific allies. Obviously, the English-speaking countries, I said, the Ozcanucas, as it's called, the Five Eyes, are kind of like the closest. Israel, obviously, is very, very close to the Americans as well, and I know that from my work with the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies. But no, the Brits are well up there.
Now, you mentioned the East Coast events that happened back in 2004 and beyond, and no doubt before 2004 as well, but the most famous one, the Nimitz Princeton. Are there any events like that you've come across or you've heard of that have happened elsewhere in the world that you feel are overlooked?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I talked about this. I think it was on Unidentified Celebrity Review. That a guy I'd worked with, who was kind of a mentor to me, an older guy. I worked for him when I came out of the military in a very small firm, doing sort of very confidential, kind of type risk management and reporting for Fortune 500 and FTSE 100 companies. And he told me he'd been in counterintelligence, and in the late 50s, there was an incident on the inner German border where the East Germans and the Russians, they'd launched 6 fighters towards the inner German border. On the NATO side, there'd been 4 British fighters, which were basically scrambled to intercept them. And then from north to south traveling, in a south-north direction, traveling along the inner German border when Germany was divided, there was a very large unidentified flying object, which had, this person told me it was like, the size of a couple of aircraft carriers, according to its radar signature. And it literally, it merged plot with the 6 Eastern Bloc fighters and the 4 NATO fighters, and then basically continued in a south-north direction. And the East Bloc fighters and the NATO fighters completely disappeared, and there was no wreckage ever found on the ground. And then the person that I was working for, he was in counterintelligence. The British and the Americans, they went around all the NATO radar sites. Everybody was told to basically shut up. Everybody was reminded of their security oaths, and all the radar tapes were confiscated. Those are the types of incidents which are being covered up by the military, because it shows that the military, NATO, and also, the Warsaw Pact in those days, the Russians, the Chinese in these days, the Brazilians, the Indians, the Japanese, the Taiwanese, anybody who has, advanced military technology and, a technologically advanced air force do not have control over their skies. And those are the kinds of things that have been covered up.
And do you think those types of incidents where pilots go missing or their craft crash because of one of these events are far more common than they were led to believe?
I would believe so, yes. And I believe you have to read between the lines here. I would say that the incidents of air intercepts where unidentified craft penetrate an air defense region of the United States, of NATO, of the UK, are far higher than we are being led to believe. And I did for American Anti-Gravity and for American Anti-Gravity, I did a short 20-minute presentation a couple of weeks ago on unidentified aerial phenomena in the Canary Islands using declassified Spanish reports. Okay, and there were multiple scrambles of interceptors to investigate objects that were not supposed to be there, that were not commercial aircraft, that were not adversarial aircraft, and that were not Spanish aircraft.
Is there also, and we're talking from a military point of view, but commercially, is there an understanding or train of thought that some of these commercial craft that go missing out over the ocean or crash, there's ever been incidents where a UAP has been involved, but again, that's covered up and put down to some kind of technical or malfunction. That can go into the realms of conspiracy theory chat, I know, but I do wonder if that sometimes can happen and it's just is easily dismissed.
Well, there's the Mantell case in the US in the late 1940s. And also there's the book, Shoot Them Down, by Frank Milburn, I believe his name is. So there's a lot more going on, I believe. And I believe that's one of the reasons why the US military, the UK military, NATO, they don't want to talk about it.
The US,
you don't
however,
want to say to your public that you don't have control over your skies, right? I mean, you've just been through the Cold War and you've successfully stopped the Russians or the Soviets and then the Russians penetrating like your airspace. And then now suddenly, well, not suddenly, but you've got these kind of like these UAP, which are penetrating your airspace. You can't exactly turn around and go, oh, well, we managed to stop the Russians invading. We stopped the Soviets invading and then the Russians, but we can't stop these things flying into our airspace with impunity. If you look at the history, for example, of the Brits, there was never a successful penetration in the whole of the Cold War of, like a Russian long-range Bear bomber or reconnaissance aircraft trying to penetrate the UK air defense region. They never managed to because there was always a fighter scramble and a fighter intercept that basically, said, basically F off before you get into our airspace. But UAP seemed to enter airspace with impunity.
From a US point of view, there's always been chat, especially recently, of religious beliefs within parts of the Department of Defense and Pentagon that sway people's thoughts that they're demonic or angelic or whatever those labels may mean. And that can very much direct how people act towards this subject within the halls of government. Is that similar from a UK point of view as far as your understanding as well?
I've never seen that. And when I was in military intelligence, I never saw any hint at all that religion played any part in decision making or influenced analyses, especially in intelligence. I never saw that. I mean, I'll give you an example. I mean, in the British Army, you have like kind of like chapel service, and you'll go and there'll be like a Muslim imam in uniform, in British uniform, part of the British chaplaincy department. There'll be like a Catholic father. There'll be a padre, a Protestant padre, right? So there'll be a Jewish rabbi as well, also in British uniform. It's very, very integrated. And it's very, very open-minded. I've never ever seen that in the British military.
No, and that's understandable then, because even our politics doesn't lean that heavily religious, and I think it's something that the British public tend not to sway too much towards in a political conversation, whereas in the US we do see that, especially what the kind of highlights and clips we get to see over this side of the pond. You mentioned about countries not wanting to talk about this for those reasons we were mentioning before, with pilots going down or going missing. However, the US, as we know from 2017, has been more open, whether they wanted to be or not. Their hands sort of been forced a little bit by Messrs. Elizondo, Mellon, Tom DeLonge, Hal Puthoff, all those gents who were involved in these projects, and no doubt countless others. And I suppose I have to give Senator Harry Reid an acknowledgement here, given he's just passed away a couple of days ago as well. Yeah, he done a lot of work that I'm sure I said, I think, when I posted on social media, that we haven't even heard of or are even aware of at this point, and may never find out either. But a bit of a trailblazer, truly, in what he done in his lofty positions within government. And part of all that work that he put in place, Susan Goh at the Department of Defense has had a rough time of it over the last couple of years, doing a lot of backpedaling as well. Backpedaling so fast you could have came back across the Atlantic, I think, at times. Now, in the D.o.D, they are trying to position the office AOIMSG as a solution to the UAP bill that was signed by President Biden. And there's been a bit of rumour and debate online. I was speaking back and forward with Roger Glassell, who said it looked like AOIMSG was going to be the office this was all directed to. I didn't feel that's what Susan Goh's statement was. Do you think it's going to be something that comes and goes? Do you think it's going to run alongside the UFO office that is set up, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the AOIMSG, I think it's yeah, exactly. I think it's definitely been an attempt to obfuscate the issue. I don't see how long term, once now that the NDAA is entered into law with all the aspects of that Gillibrand, Rubio, and Gallego put into it, I don't see how long term you're going to have two departments coexisting together, because principles of intelligence, right, is that you have to have centralized control, and you have to have economy of effort. So it doesn't make sense to have two different departments like covering the same thing. Now, I know there's a lot of overlap between the US intelligence community and between the US intelligence community and the wider kind of like, Western intelligence community. But this really doesn't make sense long term. But what remains to be seen is whether, how, the department proposed by the Pentagon will be in conflict with what has been mandated by law by the NDAA. And I think the NDAA, has to win out. And I think long term, if the D.o.D and the intelligence community try to obfuscate, then they're really going to come unstuck with, congressional people. Because, like people like Gillibrand, they put their life and soul into this effectively, and they put their reputations into this. And I don't think that they're going to tolerate any kind of obfuscation long term. But at the same time, there is a lot of potential in a bureaucracy to obfuscate, to follow. They can follow the letter of the law, but maybe not the spirit of the law. And that's what concerns me.
It comes across a little bit when it was announced, like if you're watching Deal or No Deal and you're holding all the big numbers there and only one of the little blue boxes is left and the dealer's called up and offers you £50.
Yeah.
And you've got all the cards and you could have all of this, but why not just settle for this? And it just seemed to kind of be a pretty poor attempt at a kind of sideswipe on the subject as well. And like you say, I don't see why both offices couldn't exist for a short period of time, but it makes no sense surely at all. And for me, Susan Gore's response, and like I say, I was having a very adult and reasoned debate with Roger Glassell about it. I didn't think her responses to him indicated that AOIMSG was going to be the office, and only that it would be compliant as to what the NDAA was looking to achieve. But that doesn't mean that what they're looking to do through the Gillibrand Amendment and others isn't going to come into effect and be the main office. So I don't think people have got anything to worry about there. No doubt there'll be some positioning in the background going on, but I'm sure the good guys went out in that one in the end.
Yeah, I think a big point for me, and I pointed this out on Unidentified Celebrity Review. I was like, well, Rich Hoffman from the SCU, I'm an SCU member. He pinged me a message on Signal. He was like, oh, he goes, we've been putting the amendment, and SCU is going to have candidates. We're going to, if it passes law, we're going to be able to be put forward for this this overarching this committee, this advisory committee. And to me, that was a big kind of blow in the advisory committee, and it would have included like SCU, it would have included Galileo Project, it would have included NASA, amongst others, right? So if you're DoD and your intelligence community, why would you have a problem with security cleared professionals? And then also there's the paragraph that says, that DoD and the IC can accept advice from, non-DoD and non-IC security cleared professionals. Why would you have a problem with that? And I reached out to Chris Mellon about this, and he was kind of like, no comment. But I reached out to somebody else who is intimately involved with the process, and they said the fact that Mellon and Elizondo were involved and that were likely to be basically elected by the Galileo Project to be on this advisory board, that didn't help, and that the DoD and the IC didn't want to have any more, any more supervision whatsoever. They didn't want to have any more accountability. And it's like, well, and the source also said they were worried about security issues. But if you're security cleared, because it said minimum security clearance, but if you're going to be going to be advising, and with this, in the Gillibrand amendment, it said it would advise on basically, using sensors and how to, basically use your intelligence assets to capture UAP, not in a physical sense. Then you would have to be cleared, like to probably top secret TCI, to have access to those satellites and those platforms, right? Why would you have a problem if people are security cleared? You would only have a problem if you're DoD and IC, if you don't want more oversight.
Who would you have on those boards if you were part of that committee and ultimately Franc Milburn could sign it off? Who would you be picking? Would it be Lue Elizondo and Chris Mellon, or would you be looking at others who are maybe nameless at this point?
No, I mean, Chris would definitely be on there. Lue would definitely be on there. Avi Loeb would definitely be on there. I mean, I had no problem with the scientific committee. I mean, like, why shouldn't NASA be on it? Why shouldn't Galileo Project be on it? Why shouldn't SCU be on it? I'd want, Robert Powell from SCU, Rich Hoffman to be there as well. Yeah. So, I mean, they're American patriots anyway. It's not like they're going to divulge secrets to the Russians, right? It's like, and they would have to pass a security clearance if they don't have already. And I know that Rich Hoffman already has it because he already worked for the for the US military. So there's absolutely no reason to exclude them, whatever. And that's just another example of obfuscation.
As someone who worked in intelligence themselves, Lue Elizondo has a book coming out next year that's very much looked forward to and well publicised. How difficult can that be when someone like Lue may or may not be elected into a position within this, board or this office? Is that something that could hinder that, or can that still be released? Obviously, it's going to be vetted. How does that affect his position?
Well, I don't know because I haven't read the book yet, but what I've seen of Lue so far, I don't see why it's going to hinder anything that he's done. I have to say from the start, I wouldn't say like I'm a believer, but I've always had confidence in Lue Elizondo. I mean, he's been slagged down rotten by a lot of people, and I have been as well, right? I've got a counterintelligence background, and so does he. So I kind of understand where he's coming from. But I don't think I believe, he has to keep certain things back because he has a security clearance to maintain, just as I have security oaths that I have to maintain, and also. The fact that I would never betray my country, and he's the same. He's an American patriot. I'm a British patriot, and we would never do anything to compromise the security of our respective countries, nor of the joint alliance that we have. So I can't say because I haven't read his book yet, but I hope he goes from strength to strength. And I'm a fan of his, and I'm a fan of Chris Mellon's. But let's not be in any doubt here, right? I've said from the start that. Lue and Chris, they're not about UAP transparency per se. Yeah, they are, but they're not about hanging it all out on the washing line. Okay, these guys, they want to see. This is my personal opinion, based on the paper that I wrote, based on your and Jay's interviews with Elizondo. Elizondo used the very terms himself. He said, once Congress are interested in UAP, then I think it will be a fait accompli, which is the title of my paper, that they will want to have a UAP project. Lue and Chris want to have, like a 23, a 25,000, a 25 or $30 billion project, which unites all the different special access programs under one roof. Because Eric Davis has consistently said, you reach these stumbling blocks, you reach these bottlenecks in a special access program because you can't talk to anybody outside them. And I believe that Lue and Chris, they want to get access to these special access programs. They want to unite it under one roof in a big project because for 70 years, there hasn't been enough progress, according to them. And they are American patriots, and they want to get ahead of the Russians and the Chinese. Just as Dr. Eric Davis said, by 2040, we need to have our engineering and physics approximating the capabilities of the Tic Tacs.
And
I think this is all well documented now.
Sure. Do you think that's the right way to go about this then, is to do that, have that big project, get it all under one roof? But also I'd like to ask you, is that benefiting the US and the US only, or does that still ultimately help humanity as a whole?
Okay, let's break that down into two questions. Yeah, ultimately it's going to help the US. As I put in my first paper, quoting Harry Reid, he said, the development of ATIP, when he was talking about ORSAT, but he said, this will benefit the D.o.D in ways as not yet, unimaginable to perpetuate American, preeminence and dominance on the world sphere. And I'm all for that because at the end of the day, I don't want to live in a world that's ruled by, Russia, China, or North Korea. Okay. The second part of that, how can it help humanity? Yeah, sure. I think there will be spin-off technologies, but I think it's extremely dangerous to assume that things like free energy or anti-gravity are automatically going to be like disseminated into the private sphere, because I think they're incredibly dangerous. Just as you would not expect the latest American ICBM or nuclear technology to be disseminated to Iran or North Korea. So why would you expect the UAP technology to be disseminated to the world? I think it's a very delicate question. Look, I want to help humanity, and I would like to see every Indian village, every village, every poor village in Brazil, okay, every poor village in Africa with like a free energy device. That would be awesome. And nobody has to pay for energy, but I just really don't think that that's going to happen.
Yeah, I can appreciate that, and it's one of those, it's blue sky thinking, isn't it? And Dan and I discussed this on one of the What If episodes the day after disclosure, that people will still have to go to work, people will still be in hospital ill, people will still run out of fuel, there will still be holes in the ozone layer in places, there will still be climate issues. It doesn't change overnight, if at all, within decades. I remember reading, and I've mentioned this, I'm sure, before on the podcast years ago, that Saddam Hussein was buying up PlayStation 2s in bulk because of the processing power of them. And this is a PS2, so you're looking here like in a 2005, 2006, I think, maybe even before that, to build some kind of supercomputer. And I'm sure there's an element of truth within that, with the processing capabilities of these devices and what we have now. So you think, like you say, if you put, I remember also that phone batteries wouldn't need charged if you could put a tiny, tiny, tiny nuclear device in each one. But then what would stop somebody buying a load of Samsungs or iPhones and blowing them up and causing, a terrorist incident? And it's just, you can't trust humans necessarily with that technology, can you, en masse?
Well, I've had hate comments for this, for saying that, things shouldn't be divulged, because, some people, I'll be honest, they're pretty clueless, and they just go, let's let it all hang out there, like, all the technology. And the people that I speak to are people, geniuses like Bob Maguire, right, who work for the Center for Defense Analyses. I talk to genius level scientists like that, people who've been recruited by DARPA, by the Center for Defense Analyses, by the D.o.D, recruited direct from school, people who have worked on UAP technology, and they're going, are you crazy? Releasing, free energy just like onto the open market? Because any well-developed actor like Hezbollah, which is a transnational criminal and terrorist actor with like billions over the past 2 decades in drug money and illicit activities, and their patron Iran, they could very easily, they're not stupid. Iran is not stupid. I've written extensive papers on Iran. Hezbollah are not stupid. I've written papers on them. They're not stupid. They can get the scientific knowledge. They could turn this free energy into the most devastating weapon that would make nukes look like firecrackers by comparison. This is what people that I talk to who are in the US defense and scientific community are telling me. You do not let free energy out into the open sphere, because humanity is not ready for it. It's like, yes, on the plus side, and they're humanitarians. They want to help people. They want to make sure that the Earth isn't being destroyed, to protect the ozone layer, prevent climatic change, all the rest of it. But humanity is not ready for this kind of technology. Look, we've barely scraped by with nuclear technology. It is. The Americans have already used it on the Japanese. How many times have we nearly come close to nuclear catastrophe? Are we really ready to unleash even more lethal technologies like onto the world stage? That's what scares me.
Well, I want to talk about some of the language within the bill, and it does actually keep on topic of what we're talking about. Physiological studies are mentioned within the language of the bill, and we were talking about things like Havana Syndrome. Thomas Winterton and others on Skinwalker Ranch have reported Havana Syndrome-like incidents. Thomas Winterton, who is the chief superintendent of the ranch, reported that the skin and skull basically separated from his skull and had a huge fluid layer. And others who have been on the ranch have also reported things like this as well, haven't they, Frank?
That's a very interesting question. I was looking at Gary Nolan's Vice article, yes? And it said, Vice asked him, how does the impact of electromagnetic frequencies factor into your hypotheses about what exactly transpired here? And Dr. Gary Nolan replies, with one of the patients, it happened on the Skinwalker Ranch. Given how deep into their brain the damage went, we can actually estimate the amount of energy required in the electromagnetic wave someone aimed at them. We don't think this is anything to do with UAPs. We think that's somehow some sort of state actor, and again related to Havana Syndrome somehow. Yeah. I can say I've been talking to several scientists involved in classified research for the United States government, and I want to say here that nothing that they have told me is is a state secret. They haven't told me anything classified, but I have established their bona fides. They know people that I know. These people are, like genius level, like Dr. Bob McGuire. Okay, the type of people who are, recruited from school to work for agencies like NASA, DARPA, the D.o.D, DOE, and they've told me that there is hostile state activity that utilizes portable directed energy weapons to target them. And we're not talking acoustic level directed energy weapons, which is what is commonly reported on in the press. We're talking microwave energy, which literally fries you. And the effects that they've received, they've been basically critically damaged by microwave radiation that has caused them traumatic brain injury. It's caused them, kind of like intestinal, digestive problems. It's irradiated their skin, cancer. These are the types of issues. And they told me that you don't just have now. They said that state actors, principally like the Russians and the Chinese, they don't even have to use portable directed energy weapons anymore, i.e., those that can be carried in vehicles. Now they can basically hack your router, they can hack your phone, and they can cause frequencies that irradiate you. And one of the scientists, they actually sent me a picture of a Faraday cage, kind of like envelope that they have, which they keep their mobile phone in because they don't know when their phone is going to be hacked.
Now, that's pretty scary technology, and obviously we're not necessarily here talking something non-human or exotic, but very much terrestrial. Why do you think this sort of technology is being used on officials at places like Skinwalker Ranch?
Well, one of the same sources told me that also they said that it could be they said that the former Soviet Union had some kind of like scary, this is their language, some scary space-based weapons that could fire directed energy weapons. And actually, if you look at my first paper, Dr. Jack Sarfati talks about a kind of like a wormhole, a portal over Skinwalker Ranch that he said can be used as like like a wormhole portal. But he said it could also be used as a kind of like a WMD to fry people below with electromagnetic radiation. The reason why, and my sources have said, if you're ORSAP, the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Applications Program, you're DIA, and you are trying to weaponize various phenomena on the ranch, because DIA were there. Okay, I've spoken to a couple of insiders from there. They were first concerned with, are there threats to the United States? Okay, because you've got like UFOs, you've got things coming through portals. This is all well established. Okay, so that could be a potential threat, something that's coming into your airspace through a portal. You don't know what it is. And also, dogs being fried. You're talking cryptids that are, immune to, ballistic weapon technology that can be shot at and like they don't die, like they regenerate, right? So you're talking a lot of potential threats there. So you'd want to understand what are the potential threats, okay? Number one, you'd want to understand how to counter those threats. And number three, as DIA, you would want to understand how, I can weaponize those technologies and those phenomena, okay? That's thinking from, as a military man. So adversaries would have an interest in disrupting that. And that's what two of my sources tell me, that adversaries like Russia, for example, would have an interest in disrupting those kind of advancements. And, if we look at, I was in Iraq, right? I got a very good understanding of what adversaries are trying to do. And if you look at what the Americans and the Israelis were doing to the Iranians. In 2010, they introduced a Stuxnet virus, right, to make the Iranian centrifuges have excessive revolutions that they blew up. Recently, the Israelis have assassinated America. Well, actually, going back to 2010, the Israelis have been assassinating Israeli scientists, right, in complex attacks. They've been stealing they've been stealing Iranian information. So why would not adversaries do that to UAP technology and people working on UAP programs? Because from an adversarial point of view, the first thing that you'd want to do, you'd want to try and infiltrate the networks, right, to get access to the level of advancement that the Americans have. If you can't do that, then second best default option is then you want to take out the scientists who are involved in that research. Does that make sense?
Yes. Is it a dire commentary on the human condition that superpowers like the US, China, Russia, and others, you mentioned Israel, countries like Iran, North Korea, whoever else, any of these who have that sort of knowledge or confirmed knowledge of a non-human presence, a non-human technology, they're still at odds with each other from a military point of view, trying to jostle for power when there's something else out there?
Yeah, I think it is a commentary on the human condition. And I've said this before. I mean, if I were an extraterrestrial presence or an ultra-terrestrial presence, and I were looking at the human race, right, I'd be looking at a race of beings, basically monkeys with like nukes and sophisticated weaponry that are advancing exponentially and are now launching themselves into the outer reaches of the universe. Would I really want to share my planet and my space with them? No, I wouldn't, because humans are inherently violent. You only have to look at, what we've done to each other. I mean, the Nazis did the Jews, the Khmer Rouge, Stalin, Hitler, whatever. We have done, or the Inquisition in the Middle Ages, and the things that the Europeans have done to each other. Or the things that the Europeans have done to the indigenous species, the indigenous inhabitants of North America and South America, right? Humans always screw things up wherever they go. We're like locusts. We go from one place to another, we gobble up resources, and we screw whoever's in our way because we're greedy. So would you really want to share space with us, especially when we're advancing really, really rapidly? That's the way that I look at it. But I think, it's a dire commentary on the human condition. I mean, the fact that, okay, I was in the UK military, Elizondo was in the American military. The fact that we have different human tribes and that we have to have militaries to defend our particular tribes is a commentary on the human species.
I'm going to take that conversation forward in the listener questions section. So for anyone shouting at me to follow up on that, I will be, don't worry. But I just want to finish off.
Does that make sense, mate?
Yes, it does. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I've got a few things I am going to follow up with you on, but I want to just,
can I just say a lot of people have like, sort of sent me like, crappy messages or whatever, because they think I'm kind of like some dark, deep space actor. But actually, I spent a lot of my time when I was in Iraq working for oil and gas companies, like, vaccinating kids. This isn't to say like, Frank is like a great guy or whatever, but like, I've seen the human condition. I've seen the human condition when people don't have access to vaccines, people don't have access to medical care, people don't have access to regular food, but I was in a position to do something about it. And I've seen the results of genocide on the ground. I saw what the Iraqis did to the Kurds, right? The Iraqis, they exterminated the Kurds, right, in northern Iraq. I saw that with, I didn't see the extermination with my own eyes, but I saw the villages that were destroyed. I spent 3 years of my life there. So I'm intimately acquainted with the very poorer aspects, the darkest aspects of the human condition.
And you can understand why any other species out there watching us, especially one or several species, if they can view time in a different way and they're looking at our history of the last 2,000 years or more, and they're looking along at different timeline or time points, they're going, this doesn't get any better as you go along here. They are constantly killing each other and wiping each other out. The technology gets better, but they don't. And like you say, the idea that, if we get UAP technology for the good of humanity, everything will be fine. And you look and go, well, at what point in our technological advances have things got better for us as a species, as a whole? And it hasn't. It's still very sporadic and spread out as to who benefits from what.
Yeah, I mean, there's also another aspect to that. If you're looking at the, the human species at being highly adaptable at warfare, you look at 1876, right, when the Brits went into Zululand, right, from South Africa, and they thought, yeah, we're just going to like roll straight over the Zulus, and the Brits got absolutely hammered at the Battle of Isildwana. 4 days later, there was the Battle of Rorke's Drift, which is the most glorious action in the history of the British Army, where 120 Brits, South Wales borderers, held off a force of 3,000 Zulus. But the fact is that Zulus in the Battle of Islandwana 4 days before, they had like spears and shields, and they annihilated 1,200 Brits who had cannons and the most advanced repeating rifles in the world at the time. So if you were an extraterrestrial species, you'd be looking and going, hang on, even when these guys are low tech, they can still defeat other humans who are high tech.
Yeah. It's like you say, the human condition's a very, very strange and complex thing. I want to also ask you about the language in the bill. It does mention working with allies. Now, you have mentioned the Five Eyes group. Are there any other countries you think would be some of the first to come forward to work with the United States, or maybe any surprise contenders to broach this subject?
Well, the first key one will be Brazil, right, in South America, because the Americans have always had a very close relationship with the Brazilians. And you can see that in Colares, and you can see that in various UFO encounters that the Brazilians have had. I mean, the Americans, they support the Brazilians as they supported other South American countries when they were still in deep, dark military dictatorship. The Americans supported them just for the simple fact that they were anti-Soviet. There's an increasing American relationship now with the Indians, who are also, a technologically advanced country. It's increasing. There's always been cooperation with Taiwan, which is another military advanced country, with Japan as well. So I would look, apart from NATO, apart from Five Eyes, I would be looking to Brazil, India, Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore, as key countries that the Americans would cooperate with on UAP. All those countries have intelligence and defense relationships, either formalized or informal, with the United States.
And also, it mentions within the bill, capture and exploit the technology, which is a very suggestive comment, and it gets the mind and the imagination going. We're past the question already of, are they real? Do you think, or actually, do you think it's a poor question, how far do you think we've already attempted to exploit the technology that we may already have?
I'm told that by the scientists that I mentioned earlier, and I said again that they haven't told me anything classified, but I'm told that the United States and probably the UK, because, like I said before, BA Systems is dug in deeper than Alabama Tick with the Americans, that the Americans are 20 years away. And that kind of fits in with what Dr. Eric Davis said in his April 2020 interview with Alejandro Rojas, when he's talking about, we need to have our physics and engineering, in 2040 up to where the Tic Tacs are, in case they turn around and decide to be a threat. So that kind of fits with what Dr. Eric Davis says, and that fits with what my sources have been telling me. I'm told that they already have not 5 observable craft, but they have like triangles, what some people refer to as TR3B, although I don't really like that nomenclature. And I talked to my colleague David Marler. He's an expert on triangle UFOs, and he's at the SCU as well. He doesn't like TR3B, but I'm told that by my sources, they've seen these kind of triangles, this kind of technology that the Americans have. But they tell me that it's still imperfect and it's still being worked on. And to get true 5 observable technology, it's going to take another 20 years. And that's why the interview that you did with Elizondo and Jay at Project Unity, and when Elizondo said to Jay, once Congress is interested in the UAP issue, it will be a fait accompli to give funding for a huge project. That kind of puts it in perspective.
Why do you think all this is happening now? Why, and so publicly as well? Has something triggered this happening, or was it simply Lue left his job and decided himself to come out? Is this all one man's job?
I think it's a number of things. I think it's Lue leaving his job. I think it's if you look at Harry Reid's 2009 letter, I think that was very, very decisive. It was like, this is where we need to be. And if you look at that letter, there's a lot of very, very interesting things in there. People should go back and revisit that letter. I think it's Lue. I said, Lue and Chris Mellon. They want to basically give a wake up call, and they're giving that wake up call to Congress. But also as well, I think it's been fueled by, social media. The fact that there's UFO Twitter is pretty small, but it's very, very vocal, and the fact that this has become a kind of like a national and international issue is because of social media as well. I think the time is that you can't. It's getting more and more difficult to hide, these issues away from the public, especially when instantly. I mean, if you look back in the 1950s, you had various UFO organizations, and they used to send out email. They used to send out letters, right? Like snail mail letters, and they used to do conferences, but it was all by snail mail, and they may be phoning people up. Now it's like instantaneous. Somebody discovers something like D.D. Johnson, right, on Twitter, and he just puts it out straight there, and immediately you've got any number of people in the world can follow that. It's exponential use of social media as an intelligence resource, effectively, and it's making it very much harder for the US to cover this up. And also, you've got guys like Greenwald at the Black Vault, who's just relentless with the FOIA, and then you have issues where it looks like the D.o.D. Freedom of Information Act people who are the people who are basically processing the FOIAs. It looks like they are trying to obfuscate the FOIA process. All that goes across social media and national media very, very quickly. It's becoming increasingly difficult to hide these things.
Now, just before we get to listener questions, I've got one more thing I want to talk to you about, because like you've talked about exponentially increasing technologies and the difference it's making, social media, the James Webb Telescope, as we speak, is unfurling its solar shield. And it's incredible that the achievement just to get that thing into space, let alone the 100 things that have to happen now it's in space for it to become fully operational. My co-host Dan referred to it as going from VHS to 4K DVDs, and we're going to see a whole new light spectrum as well. Do you think the James Webb Telescope is going to play a part in finding other sources of life in the universe, or are we going to find that closer to home with organisations like the Galileo Project and SCU?
Look, I'm not a scientist, so I can't really say. To be honest, I can only hypothesize.
Yeah, as a member of the public, then, I mean, but we're putting this thing up there. It's going to see further and clearer than ever before. Do you think that sort of technology, and actually I'll bring forward a question I was going to ask you later as part of the quickfire, even organisations like NASA, do they still have a part to play in one day announcing we have found extraterrestrial life somewhere else? Or does that come through a government organisation or a space force? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think NASA already has said that they found life somewhere else with microbes, right?
Yeah, I get these things are always debated, but we're talking that we send something up and there's a whole city of lights on Venus somewhere, or and for those, I know Venus isn't going to have.
I think as far as Webb goes, very possibly, but also if you have an advanced civilization that's visiting us, and we've seen that UAP are able to, they have hypersonic velocities with without signatures, and also signature management, then will we discover them in space? I'm not so sure, but I think there's a lot more that NASA has on film that we haven't seen yet, or some things that have been leaked and we have seen. Look, I'm not a big believer. I don't trust big government in any sense, either the UK or the American government or anybody else. And I think that they know a lot more than they're telling us. In terms of sort of disclosure, it depends what it means to people. I don't think that the American government or the UK government has any reason to disclose more than it needs to. And if they think that they can continue along just basically giving the minimal kind of like dribble, then they will do so until forced to do so otherwise.
Just before we get into listener questions, where we're going to approach some more of the the speculation that people have been throwing the questions at me for you. Some things we've not quite approached yet in the conversation that I'm looking forward to getting into. I'm going to hand over to our sponsors who have a quick message, and then we'll be right back. Thanks to the sponsors, and thank you for checking those out. If you don't want to hear adverts, remember, folks, you can sign up to Patreon, Apple, Spotify, and check out those premium services. They're less than the price of a coffee, and you don't have to hear the ads. But if you do, thank you very much for checking those out. Listen, Frank, I have a ton of listener questions for you here, things we haven't quite touched on yet within the body of the interview, and I'm looking forward to discussing some of these more speculative areas with you.
Shoot, brother.
Yeah, straight into Dave Lamborn. Dave wants to know, how prominent is the rumour amongst the intelligence community about a cataclysmic event that could happen sometime relatively soon? Have you heard this from any independent sources?
Yeah, very good question. I've heard this from 3 independent sources, one from the intelligence community and from 2 scientists. I cannot verify what they've said, apart from they're all telling me the same thing. And I know I've spoken with Ross Coulthard, and he's told me that he's heard the same thing from his sources. But it's something that I can't physically verify. But I would say I can't say one way or another. They believe that it's true.
And when we talk cataclysms, are we looking here at like Armageddon, Independence Day? Obviously, you can't break trust, but can you tell us a movie that we should be kind of watching to brush up on?
Well, no, I've been told various different scenarios that it could be a meteorites heading towards the Earth. It could be, and this sounds really, really out there. This is what I've been told. Okay, I can't prove this. It sounds really out there. People interfering with, American nukes, which would be targeted to destroy incoming asteroids. Okay. Then you add into the mix, time travelers, one time traveler group, which is Greys, us from the future, who want the cataclysm to happen because they want to exist, regardless of how screwed up they are, and other future humans who exist just after the cataclysm happen and want to come back because they have the technology and want to prevent the cataclysm happening. I can't substantiate any of that, okay? It's stuff that I've been told, and I believe my sources when they say they believe it. I have one source in particular. They tell me that they are in contact with temporal agents. Okay, so there you go.
Through no other thing other than coincidence, then again, if you don't believe in that, it might all be karma, whatever it might be. I had lined up Ross Coulthard, Dr. Michael Masters, and then yourself as 3 interviews in a row, and people might think that was deliberate genius on my part, as they've flowed together very well. It was just pure luck on my part. I managed to get 3 excellent guests. Dr. Michael Masters in the last interview talked about extratemporal visitors. What are your thoughts on the idea that we do have? And listen, time travel is a huge subject. If you want to think Back to the Future, you can. Tenet, any kind of movie, but it might be something far more strange and complex than we can even imagine how time may work. But do you think there's a likelihood that we do have some sort of time traveling entity or entities being involved with us as a species?
Personally, I do. And Mike Masters is a colleague from SCU as well, and I've talked to Mike, about this, and he's also spoken to one of my sources about this, who is, like I said, a genius level scientist. I believe it's quite possible. I personally don't have any proof. I personally haven't been contacted by a temporal agent, but I'm speaking to people like for months now who consistently are saying that that these things do happen. And that they are in contact with people from the future, and that we all have a destiny to play. So it's very hard for me to discount what they're saying. Let's put it that way, based on my relationships with them.
And were they ever giving you any sort of timescales as to when events may happen or occur?
I was told within the next 10 years.
we're going to see it then. So if indeed it does happen, but when you're talking about time and timelines, things can and do change, and there's always the potential. Like I think you very rightly said that you believe your sources believe it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that somewhere down the line sources can be wrong or fed misinformation or things change. So that's why you've always got to quantify those comments. Like
I
this,
don't believe that they've been fed misinformation, because they are very highly placed, both in the intelligence community and also in the science world. In terms of, a couple of people that I'm talking to, they're up there. They're unknown, but in the science world, they're up there with Eric Davis and Hal Puthoff. They're in that kind of pantheon, right, of kind of like brilliance. I believe that they believe what they're saying. I just can't provide any proof. And me, Andy, I will always, if I write a paper, I'll put down, Elizondo said this or Chris Mellon said that. And okay, you can take that to the bank, or you can, you can decide what you want based on the basis of that. But the fact is that I will put down what somebody has said, or I will have an email that I can reproduce, or I'll have, like from the Project Condign report, I will have, an extract from a declassified document. If I don't have that, then it's just hypothesis.
Sure. And it's do you know what? It's fun as much as cataclysms and cataclysmic events can be fun to hypothesize about and discuss and talk about. So it's something we'll definitely be keeping an eye on. And hopefully those sort of events do not happen, obviously. On to
Hope
Neumann.
not.
Yeah, Neumann has sent in some great questions recently. Has Frank any ideas in which way our genetics may have been tinkered with in terms of mechanisms and towards which abilities?
I don't know about that. I know John Ramirez does, but I don't have anything really to add to that. I just don't know. I think it's quite possible, but I've got no evidence or to back up anything that I would or would not say.
And is that something you've heard about in your time in the IC community, or in the last couple
Nothing
of years?
I heard about in the IC, no. No, but I can't discount it, because I've spoken to a lot of people, experiencers. I'm an experiencer, but I've spoken to experiencers, abductees. I can't discount what people are saying, because there's simply too many people who are saying the same thing. If you look at like a lot of the research that's been done, whether it's John Mack or others, there's just there are too many people saying the same thing. So I can't discount what they say. I just don't have any experience of it myself, but I keep an open mind.
So we're talking about you're meeting various officials, you're talking to various different sources.
Yeah.
You're an experiencer. Does that sway? You've said you've got an open mind, but how much of your own experiences change what you do and don't take into consideration as being the truth?
Well, put it this way: from my own experiences, talking to Colonel John Alexander, and he's one of the only ones that I've shared my experiences with. I believe completely in the hitchhiker theory from Skinwalker, because I had a similar experience myself after having written my first paper and having been in kind of like deep discussions with Colonel John Alexander about Skinwalker, and I'll just leave it at that. But it left no doubt in my mind that you don't even have to have gone to Skinwalker. You could just be talking about it, thinking about it, writing about it, and you might have an experience.
I can appreciate that. No, thanks for sharing. Craig wanted to know, what evidence has Frank seen of Holden's credentials? Holden is an official we've heard about in the scene in the last couple of years, particularly.
I've heard about him and I haven't checked him out. It's just something that I haven't done. I obviously check out all my sources, whether I speak to a scientist or a member of the intelligence community. It's they always know somebody that I know. For example, when I first reached out to Colonel John Alexander, I got his email from Dr. Jack Sarfati, and like, they're not the best mates. They're not the best of mates by any stretch, right? But I contacted Colonel John Alexander, and I said, this is kind of like my network, and I said, do you know Colonel Charles Beckwith, who was the founder of the American Delta Force? And John Alexander's like, oh yeah, Frank. He goes, I know Charlie Beckwith. We were on a ranger course together in 1958. And I went, oh, that's great, Colonel. I said, because my old man knows Charlie Beckwith from Hereford days. because Charlie Beckwith went to Hereford to basically train with SAS. So that was kind of like my in to Colonel John Alexander. So I've got that kind of network. And if I speak to people, I don't know, the Central Intelligence Agency or the DIA, I've got networks, people who know me and will introduce me to them. And then once you're introduced to them, then, somebody new pops up and, I will always go back to my contacts, go, do you know this person or do you know of this person? I'll go, yes, he or she is legit, or he or she is, talking bollocks.
And on this occasion, Holden isn't one you've heard of yet, or been able to clarify or quantify.
I haven't even checked up on him. I mean, he hasn't been on my radar at all. Sorry, I didn't answer your question.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to make sure I hadn't missed that. And is it someone that you plan on, or is it just a case of unless you come across them yourself, there's no need to?
No, to be honest, I'm already that borrowed. I mean, I've got such great contacts. I haven't been writing papers just because I'm literally on Signal and other means like every day. I probably spend about an hour to 2 hours a day talking with my sources just now. I mean, I've got enough material to write like a couple of books if they would let me. But I would never do that without their confidence to do so. Actually, one of my sources has said that they want to write a book with me, which would be very, very interesting. But they haven't come out of the closet yet. And, obviously I'm never going to expose my sources unless they want to be. But, that's the stage that I'm at the moment.
Maybe put something in the form of an interesting narrative and a story that you can, Tom DeLonge seems to have done that quite successfully. So I'm sure there's room for it from a British perspective.
Yeah, but me, Andy, I like to do things that are kind of like original. And I like to think that, my first paper, my second paper were original. I want to do original things other people haven't covered. I do kind of like UAP news. I covered like Gillibrand amendment and things like that. But I think I'm more kind of like a deep dive kind of bloke.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And listen, let's get back into the questions. Christopher Conradi. Christopher said, stories about sightings by army personnel seem to always end with, I reported this to my superior and was told to keep it quiet. It never happened. And you've kind of mentioned that before with some of the pilot stuff going missing, often with evidence being destroyed in the process. I wonder if Frank wants to speculate as to why this culture seems to permeate all levels of the military. Why would a lower level officer really care to make these observations disappear and care to the degree of destroying evidence and going way outside of protocol? The risk reward doesn't make sense.
The truth is, I don't know. It would have to be on a case by case basis. Obviously, historically, there's been like a massive stigma associated with UAP sightings. One thing I will say is, to my knowledge, and you can read between the lines here, that hasn't existed in the UK. Okay, people can report things. I can't just say what they reported, but people have reported things. Stigma has existed for years and years and years. So, if you want to advance, look at Bob Sellers. I mean, he reported his experiences and what happened at his miso silo, right?
Yeah.
And it was taken seriously, and he wasn't removed from his post. Okay, but he wasn't told anything about it either. So, that's what you're dealing with.
And that's fair. John Coughlin asks, does Frank harbour thoughts on the deafening silence from the US Air Force? More conspicuous by the minute, focuses ever-increasing consideration that it is the nexus for historical and contemporary denial of the phenomena.
Well, I think there's less deafening silence now from the US Air Force with the publication of Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, because when they're talking about the interview that they had with Air Force Officers Special Investigations, Special Projects, they were told that Air Force Officers Special Investigations had investigated the Northern Tier sightings in the 1970s. So I think slowly this is coming out. But what I still find intriguing is, in 2004, the Nimitz case, who was taking the hard drives, right? So these were Air Force officers being helicoptered out to battle group ships. Air Force officers taking hard drives from the Hawkeye, from the aircraft, and from the Princeton. So who were these Air Force officers? Were they Air Force officers, special investigations? And then who was carrying out, like the forensic analysis of the data sets that they had? And that still hasn't come out.
Do you hold the belief that with the potential new office and the AOIMSG, that the Air Force and the Navy, they may start working a little bit more together, or is that still going to be something they're going to fight as much as possible, as pertains to this subject, of course?
Well, I think there's always going to be professional rivalry because the Navy has a huge amount of aircraft with the Marine Corps as well. You got to look at it in terms of the American Army has aircraft, the Air Force has aircraft, right? An aircraft fleet. The Navy has an aircraft fleet. The Marine Corps have an aircraft fleet, although they're part of the Navy, and also the Coast Guard have an aircraft fleet. Okay, so it's always a competition for resources. I think, though, I would like to think that with the current NDAA as it has been signed off, that now, because it's basically a transposition of the different service branches also interlock with different members of the American intelligence community. So Army is part of the Army intelligence is part of the intelligence community. Coast Guard intelligence is part of the intelligence community. Naval intelligence is part of the intelligence community. Marine Corps intelligence is part of the intelligence community, right? Air Force intelligence is part of the intelligence community, and so on. So now that they've been mandated by Congress to work together, I think that they will work together better. Because if they don't, then their senior uniform members are going to have to start asking questions.
Peter wants to know, what do you guys think of what will come of John Greenwald from the Black Vault's FOIA appeal for the UAP Task Force info, the request that's due on January 3rd or 4th, and also Happy New Year. So Happy New Year, Peter.
Yeah, Happy New Year, brother. I've got no idea, but Greenwald is a top guy, and I wish him all the best with that. But I've got no idea about an individual FOIA request.
I know, I was just double checking that literally as we were recording, John had put online that he's had a reply to some stuff, but I've not managed to check that out yet. So that's maybe something we can follow up on in a future pod, just in case it's the response that he was expecting. But yeah, thanks again, Peter. Gnosis says, for Frank, do you have a favourite case, or based on what you know, a most credible case that involves not only a craft, but interaction with an entity?
Oof. That's a difficult one. I mean, I'd say my favorite case is the 1976 Tehran case with fighter interceptors trying to intercept UAP. I don't have a favorite case that involves an entity. Although that South American one, that film that Jacques Vallée did with that guy on the Pampas, right? That was very, very compelling. So that's an awesome case.
Have you seen, Frank, the Turkey UFO footage as it's known?
Yeah, I have seen it. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I'll be honest. I'm not an imagery specialist. I saw what's the name of that Air Force guy? He did a breakdown of it. He was very, very good.
Chris Leto.
Yeah. Chris Leto. Yeah. And I actually chatted to him. He did a very good breakdown on it. I don't know enough about it, but it seems very compelling based on the work that he did. I mean, he's a former lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Air Force. If he pays attention to it, then it's worth it. Then it's worthy of study.
And if people want to go back and check, I interviewed Chris a few months ago as well, and he's a good guy. He's got a good channel, and definitely be checking that out, folks.
No, he's sound. I mean, he comes at it from, he was an air safety expert, apart from being, basically, a top pilot, an air safety expert, and an aerial investigator. So, he's a very, very credible guy to be investigating these things.
Yeah, I think on that interview, we done about 30 to 40 minutes just on his background before of any UFO chat, and we left it in just because of the extensiveness of his experience. So, like you say, that does help. Not to say it means he's definitely right, but like you say, from a credibility point of view, he's presenting the best evidence he has in front of him, which is
Well,
always welcome.
to me, he's a lot more credible than skeptics. I mean, he's actually done the business. He's actually, flown his aircraft into harm's way, right? So,
Absolutely, yeah.
And protected the skies above us. So, a guy like that's always going to have my respect.
Speaking of respect, Nathan, who is a long-time listener and also co-host on a few shows now, he says, I pretty much agree with Frank that if the US has some sort of advanced tech stemming from the study of the phenomenon, that such tech should remain in the black as long as possible. However, I wonder to what degree he has heard or suspects that the others may push a disclosure timeline regardless of what the government may prefer. Has he heard of any intel suggesting this possibility?
I haven't, no.
It also follows up, to what degree do you think that others themselves may be engaged with the government? Are they passively or actively engaged?
I believe very deeply engaged, but I've got no proof of that.
And is that, again, just off the back of, like you mentioned, sources mentioning temporal agents? That's as far as you can really go in terms of, I've been told, but there's no evidence.
Correct.
That's totally fair. And again, thanks to Nathan for the question. Jared, how will the new language in the NDAA about sharing information with foreign partners change information sharing? We've been told information sharing has already been happening through Five Eyes, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I think information sharing, especially between Great Britain and the United States, we're the closest allies, right? A lot of people think that Israel is America's closest ally, but actually it's Great Britain. If you look back to Rendlesham, that sharing has been on UAP has been right from the start. So I think this is just really formalizing a relationship that's already there. Ross Coulthard has also got things to say about that, but I think if you look at the deeper relationship, this is what's in the NDAA is really just formalizing what's already been there for years and years. And I think that's the language in the NDAA is just a means for Congress to formalize and to say to the USIC and the D.o.D, you will tell us what's going on with allies.
Jack Thomas, final question. He had a couple of questions of which we've touched on already, but he mentioned the cataclysm comments that you've made and we've just talked about. He wants to know, do you think that the appetite for what seems to be a part disclosure from the US government is related to potential cataclysms?
I'm told yes, maybe. But again, I've got no proof for that. I keep an open mind. I wish I could say more, but I can't. It would just be speculation.
No, that's totally fair. And listen, if you ever want to speculate, people do enjoy it. But I know, Frank, and I've heard you in other interviews, that you try and keep it as evidence-based as possible, which I can totally respect.
Yeah, exactly, mate.
I want to finish off with the quick-fire round. I've got quite a few topics here that I want to touch on. You can say as little or as much on each one as you like, or you can pass if you don't have any particular thoughts. As we have been recording, and we've just took a quick break, I have one more listener question sent in from long-time listener Dave Smethurst, and I hate to miss off any of Dave's questions. Dave says, Frank, I recently read about a Dr. Dan Burrish, formerly known as Crane, who featured in a book by William Hamilton called Project Aquarius. To cut a long story short, Dr. Burrish claimed to work at the S4 facility at Area 51 and claims to have come into contact with future human Nordics and Greys in a conflict trying to prevent or allow a catastrophe in the near future. It sounds very similar to your recent accounts, and I wondered if this was related to the info you had heard and was indeed the source of it.
Cheers, Dave, and hi. I haven't specifically heard about that case, but it does sound similar to what I've been told. I don't know. I'm very wary when people talk about Greys or Nordics. I bow to the superior knowledge of my SU colleague, Dr. Michael Masters, in terms of hominin evolution. Okay, I'm not scientifically equipped to deal with that kind of equation, but all I can do is keep an open mind. But it does sound, what you say, very similar to what I've heard.
Frank, and I'm going to be selfish and put in my own listener question here. It's my podcast,
Go
so
for
I
it.
get to do that. We've not really touched on this, and as best you can, and I know you seem the type who doesn't like to really speculate or give, off-the-cuff opinion, but I have to ask, when we come into this subject, it's usually other aliens coming from other planets and little flying saucers, yes or no, and that's a fascinating question anyway. Where you're at now, right at the last days and hours of 2021, what do you think, in your opinion, is the most likely happening behind the phenomenon? If someone asked you in a few sentences to sum up, aliens, do you believe in all that? What's going on? What would you say?
I would say yes, no, and I don't know. I can keep a completely open mind. I've asked some of the most intelligent people that I know, like Dr. Michael Masters, David Marler, Colonel John Alexander, Rich Hoffman, who's been studying the phenomena since before Blue Book started. I keep a completely open mind. Extraterrestrial hypothesis, certainly. Ultra terrestrial, extra dimensional, all those are possible. Just look at Skinwalker. I keep an open mind. I don't know. I don't have the answers, unfortunately. I'd like to know one day.
Not yet. If you had the answers, that would be a hell of a best-selling book, I'm sure. That would be original. Listen, let's finish off with the quick-fire round. Again, few words, few sentences on each of these.
Go
first
for it.
one is, what are your thoughts on Skinwalker Ranch and what's happening there?
I think Skinwalker's absolutely phenomenal. I absolutely believe what we're being told in terms of the shows. And I think it's highly credible, the research they're doing there. I think that we just see, probably 10% or 5% of what they're actually going through there.
The role of consciousness and UAPs.
That's another excellent question. I think consciousness plays a very big part. I don't know to what extent, but I want to find out more. But I believe it could be, we are being, fooled by some kind of, our own psychological prejudices towards it, or some kind of technology that basically influences us, or some kind of mind-to-mind communication that gives us images that aren't actually there. Some of it may be real, some of it maybe not.
Your thoughts on the abduction phenomena?
I keep a completely open mind. I've spoken with a number of abductees, including my mother, I'd have to say, and I believe it completely credible.
Is that something you've talked about in the past, or is that one of those that you go as far as?
I haven't talked about it in the past, no, but I believe it's absolutely credible. I mean, I'm an experiencer. There's just far too many people, and I've talked to people, credible military people as well. Well, I mean, I will take anybody as credible unless they're a proven charlatan and bullshitter. I've spoken to far too many people who've had abduction experiences not to take it seriously. It's like you can't have hundreds of thousands or millions of people making these things up and making up the same kind of claims. It's just not possible. So I find it highly credible.
Your thoughts on cattle mutilations?
Yeah, I believe I've been told by scientists that I talk to that one theory is that cattle mutilations may be linked to future humans in terms of they are in a future biodegraded environment where there isn't enough protein, where animals have died off, and that they want to synthesize and clone proteins for their consumption.
Interesting. Your thoughts on crop circles?
Yeah, crop circles is another interesting one. I've been told by scientists that that is a result, apart from the ones that are hoaxed, that is a result of UAP extracting energy from the ether. But they won't tell me how or why, because that's classified.
Sure, and that's something we're going to do a crop circle show on in 2022, because I've not avoided but just not come across doing that yet. So really interested in that.
I don't know enough about it, to be honest, but I'm just told that the physical characteristics of like the corn stalks, it is indicative of UAP activity extracting a particular kind of energy from the ether. That's what I'm told.
What are your hopes for the UAP subject in the coming year?
I hope that there will be one UAP office and not two, and I hope that it will be as mandated by Congress, and I hope that it will be to the spirit and also to the letter of the law, and I hope that the next unclassified report will give us like more information than the one that we received last June.
Do you think we're likely to see any more of those videos that we've not had for a couple of years now?
I don't know, but I'd like to see why, for example, we shouldn't see something declassified from, I don't know, the 1950s, the 1960s, something that was captured maybe by satellite or by an aircraft sensor that is no longer classified.
Sure, that
I
would
don't see
be
why
good.
that shouldn't be released to the public, because it doesn't give away American or British capabilities.
No, of course. And the final one is, what does disclosure mean to you?
Okay, disclosure means different things to different people. Some people want it to mean, like let it all hang out on the line and you open the hangar doors. And also, unfortunately, some people, I think it's because they want to bring down the American government. I don't know, it's maybe like related to anarchism, because they don't trust the government and they want to basically break down all the barriers. I think that some secrets have to be kept secret. And, I was a part of that world. I think what should be declassified to the public should be declassified. I think for me, disclosure is there's been secrecy for far too long. And I would like to see, the public getting a lot more information. Obviously, if we're not alone in the universe or not alone on Earth, then, we all have a right to know that within the bounds of national security, something that will not give assistance to the likes of, China, Russia, Iran, etc. But, we all have a right to know about our own existence and what can improve our own existence, and whether we're alone or not. I mean, because that is the ultimate question, isn't it?
Absolutely is. In the description to this show, I'm going to have links to those papers that you mentioned that you've written in the past, because those are something that people will ask me about, no doubt, and also your social media handles, how people could get in touch with you. But do you want to just finish off, Frank, letting people know what's to come for yourself in the coming year as well? What can we expect from you?
Yeah, sure. I've actually been very kindly invited, kind of all expenses paid, to the largest security and defense conference in the world coming up in January. So I'm going to go and do that, and I'm going to be talking about advanced, kind of like beyond next generation technologies. Okay, it's not like a UAP conference per se, but I'll get UAP in there somewhere. But it's going to be nice for me. It's going to be like it's going to be the first time away that I've had in 2 years since all this COVID crap hit. So I'm kind of looking forward to it. And it's the former head of MI5 is going to be there as a keynote speaker. The former head of the UK Defence Staff. So it's going to be a very, very interesting event.
Excellent. Well, Frank, I look forward to speaking to you again, hopefully in the coming year, and also hearing more from you. It's been great talking with you.
Thank you very much, Andy.
That is all for this week's show. Thank you very much for listening. Please remember to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. You can like, retweet and subscribe. That would all be very much appreciated. The shows are being uploaded onto YouTube as we speak more and more. You can sign up at patreon.com/That UFO podcast to access the shows ad-free as well. Please get in touch on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, That UFO podcast. Of course, on Twitter, it's at UFO UAPAM. And again, folks, as always, keep looking up. You never know what you might see.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked a little around. Meditative game of state full on meta. I can't imagine how it could have been any better. I got to the top of the stairs and there he was. Like, you awake? I was about to abduct you, cuz. I jumped back and nearly kissed myself, and I climbed out the window after the elf, and I woke up in my bed and there was something on my head and everything was weird and everything was red. I called out to my boys, they thought this was noise, they thought it was a dream, they thought it was my toys, they thought it was my problems, and they think I should seek therapy, and I don't know what to do because it doesn't really scare me. If you really want to know who I think I'd be, I think it's you and me and us and we and him and her and that and she and that thing over there and what's that, James? Consider your heart, consider time, consider your space, consider your lies, consider your life, consider your eyes. It wasn't a tic tac and not quite a saucer.
What's that in the clouds between that sun and moon? Got sleep paralysis and goblins in my room.
It wasn't a tic tac and not quite a saucer.